earning less than men in the conversation. If this worries you, for the best question, my colleague Sasha, who is there, has a free copy to give to you. So do put up your hand, ask the hardest questions that are on your mind. We would love to hear from you. But seriously, though, this event is timely. Tomorrow is Equal Pay Day, a national campaign led by the Fawcett Society, and marks the point in the year when, based on the gender pay gap, women overall in the UK stop being paid relative to men. So what that means is that if you're a woman who is in the room this evening, you should probably stop working this evening if you want your hourly pay to equal men's this year. Very depressing. LSE Library is home to the Women's Library, which holds the archive of the Fawcett Society. Please do check it out if you haven't seen it already. Almost 100 years ago, the Fawcett Society found the Women's Library, and today it keeps alive the history of the long march to equality, quoting the Guardian journalist Mary Scott. Housekeeping, we're not expecting any fire alarm, but if one does sound, please walk, do not run, and the stewards will guide us outside of the room. For tonight's event, I'm going to do something slightly different. I have 4 amazing panelists here with me, and rather than me describing their bios, I'm going to let them describe highlights to you so we can get on with the conversation and you can hear more from them and not from me. So can I first ask you to welcome our panel today, Selena Flavius, Dr. Olga. Seated next to her is Jane Garvey, Dr. Olga Frańczak, and Alesha De-Freitas. So my first question, as I said, is to ask the panel to introduce themselves, starting with you, Alesha, and also to let us know why tonight's event is so important to you.
Well, thank you so much for having us. Thank you to the Women's Library and thank you to Fawcett East London, who are a brilliant organisation. So my name is Alesha De-Freitas. I'm Head of Policy at the Fawcett Society. We take our name from Millicent Fawcett, who was our founder and sort of begun that long march to equality. I shouldn't say begun. Plenty of amazing women came before her, but really tried to unify the sector and both first for getting women the vote, but then also realising that was really just the first step in what we needed to do, and continuing over the past 150 odd years, I think, to try and take tangible steps towards women's equality. We have a big focus on women in the workplace and getting equality there. We're also doing work on women in public services and feminist AI. And we are powered by our members, so we're a membership organisation. So yeah, that's all about me. Thank you.
Amazing. Can I turn to Olga? Same question.
Thank you very much. So my name is Olga Frańczak, and what draws me to this topic is first and foremost recognition that gender pay gap is a symptom of a wider gender inequality across the society. I did my PhD research on the impact of gender stereotypes on realization of human rights and how international human rights systems are trying to address that. And while that might seem quite removed from everyday life, essentially what I was looking at is, reviewing a very well-meaning documents, how they are trying to address something so fluid, so abstract as stereotypes and bias. And while I do love data, actually what inspired me to do this research is my long-term work with grassroots feminist organizations. And I have worked for over 10 years in a domestic abuse charity. And that definitely drives a lot of what I do. And in my current role, I work at Recruitment and Employment Confederation. We are a membership body for the recruitment industry across the UK, and I support 3,000 businesses across the UK to drive inclusive labour market. And so that will help me kind of highlight how you can try to tackle gender pay gap from the recruitment stage already. And I'm very excited to be here.
Thank you. My name is Jane Garvey. I am a radio presenter working at the moment for Times Radio, which is, let's just own it, owned by Rupert Murdoch and News UK. But I will say this about Rupert, he's a more generous employer than the BBC ever was. So I worked at the BBC for over 30 years in local radio, for Radio 5 Live, and then Radio 4, where I presented Woman's Hour and where I blew my gasket when I discovered that even though I presented the only program that ever talked about the gender pay gap, I was actually a victim of the gender pay gap. Because the presenters of Woman's Hour were, guess what, not paid as much as the presenters of other equivalent programs on Radio 4. In fact, there aren't any equivalent programs. Actually, in terms of the punch that that program can still pack, it isn't perfect, and it's always had its critics, but it does talk about really important issues, and it presents them in a way that is easy for most of us to understand, I hope, and it goes into awkward crevices of our life that few other programs ever get close to. So I'm not going to knock that program. I never will. Really proud to have been a part of it, but it was a bit of a blow to discover that the BBC, by some margin, one of the most self-regarding employers in the land, was actually not doing the right thing by its female staff. So that's really why I'm so keen to be here tonight and to talk about this. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Selena Flavius. Can you hear me? Do I need to lean like this?
Yeah.
Perfectly.
So yeah, my name is Selena Flavius. I'm a published author. So I wrote a book in 2021 called Black Girl Finance. And it was all about the issues around the gender pay gap, the ethnicity pay gap also. And at this moment in time, I also work as a financial planner and financial advisor. So my job is to when I wrote the book, I should say initially, I really wanted to highlight the gender pay gap because I spent the first half of my career not being aware of it. And I do look back and I do think that if I was more aware of the gender pay gap and the long-term issues that it has in terms of our lifestyles right now, how we get to enjoy our finances right now, and then in the future, how our pensions end up as a result, and this huge pension gap that exists due to the gender pay gap, I would have done things slightly differently, navigated my career in slightly different way. And even now, working as a financial advisor and planner, it is all about making sure that, we are identifying risks for our clients when it comes to their finances, and just making sure that they are, making the most of their wealth. Once we're able to kind of have these conversations, be aware of the financial gaps, and advocate for ourselves within the workplace, and go through life and our careers basically. But, yeah.
Can you expand more, Selena, on what you do? So the first question that I have for everybody is in regard to some of the social, economic or philosophical rationale. Why should we be creating workplaces where women thrive? So you've already spoke a bit about the economic consequences. Can you say more?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was doing some research before today's session, and currently there are 16 million women aged over 16 in the workplace. So the employment rate for women is 72.1% compared to 77.6% for men. So the gap is, quite minuscule. So, that's a heck of a lot of women within the workplace. And we need to make sure that they are thriving, they're comfortable, they're getting out of the workplace what the majority of men get out of the workplace. So that's number one, just, and also I benefit because I'm a woman in the workplace. On an economic, from an economic viewpoint, women pay taxes, we pay into the system as well. And there is a huge gap of billions due to the gender pay gap that's not going into the economy. If anyone is relying on, the state and some of the services that are being provided, that comes from our pockets. So the more women who are, financially thriving, paying more, getting paid more and then paying more in taxes, we benefit as a whole, men and women. Again, what I mentioned around our pensions, if anyone, we're in a university, you get, probably a final salary or defined contribution, defined benefit pension, that's based on your salary. So it's really, really important to understand the impact of your salary on being able to make sure you're comfortable at retirement. So although it seems like a small issue, it's really not. It has, implications for us now, as well as implications for us long term. So it's a really important issue that, organisations and businesses need to tackle. And it's a really important issue for us to be aware of and make sure that we are again, advocating for ourselves in the workplace, making sure we're having these salary negotiations. Also, outside of the workplace, in our relationships, if we're taking time off for caring responsibilities, are we getting our partners to pay into our pensions for us to bridge the gap? So much that we can talk about, based on this topic.
And there's probably people who are in the audience who will start their first job out of university soon, and also other people who might be negotiating pay increases. Do you want to give a couple of tips about how they can do that?
Yeah, okay, yes. Okay. So I think number one is, if you're going into the workplace, just be aware that there might be some pushback from your employer around having conversations. We were talking about this before, around being in the workplace and speaking to colleagues, really just freely, casually about pay. And then suddenly there's an email that might come round to say you're not to speak about this topic. So I think, just being careful where you have these conversations. You are actually allowed to have these conversations if you feel like there is some disparity, if you feel like you are being paid less. So you might be discouraged from having the conversations, but you can have the conversations if you think that you are being underpaid. So that would be my first tip. Do have these conversations. That's a conversation so many times, but do have these conversations around pay with friends, colleagues. Do your research as well. And I would say, rather than just kind of going with the flow, and sometimes we do, and I've done it in my career, always do stop and have a think about what salary you want for the role that you're going for. So.
And Selena's being extraordinarily kind. I was the person who got the angry worded letter for discussing their pay at work from my employer. Jane, to you, what are the reasons that we should be creating workplaces where women thrive?
Well, because why shouldn't we?
Yeah.
That's the bottom line, really, isn't it? I feel like I'm slightly overshadowed by the other panelists here, because my experience is a very small one of a very peculiar line of work. Broadcasting is very odd, and most people wisely choose to avoid it. But it is, however, a great thing to do if it's what intrigues you, and I still love doing it for a living. It's a fabulous thing to do if that's what you enjoy. And I think it's just a point worth making. I was saying to Selena earlier that that internalized misogyny, which is in all of us, was, I think, even greater in the generation above me, and certainly in the one above that. And so when I started making a bit of a public display of myself when the BBC's gender pay gap was revealed, I was at that point presenting Woman's Hour, and I just thought, look, I'm going to do something about this and say something, because they can't sack me. And if they do, it's a bloody great story. BBC sacks woman who presents programme that bangs on about women's rights for supporting women's rights. So they didn't sack me, but my career, which I think in fairness was already up a bit of a cul-de-sac, very much stayed in that cul-de-sac. And I ended up leaving a couple of years later, but I'm having a great time now, so no one needs to feel sorry for me. But I think what I would say is that speaking up, speaking out, although you should, it's not easy, it's not comfortable, and it was considerably easier for me because I was white, menopausal, furious. And those three things actually really helped me and protected me to a degree. I think it would have been considerably harder for a younger woman or for a woman of colour to actually make the fuss that I was able to do in a very mild way for a couple of very quiet weeks in the news cycle when there wasn't much else going on, and a group of BBC women complaining about how little they earned was enough to generate some headlines and actually just start a conversation about equal pay. It was a very small thing. We had a petition, we got some famous names to sign it, we got a lot of newspaper coverage. Again, just to be completely real about it, the newspapers hate the BBC, so they were very happy to do this story knocking the BBC. So I'm under no illusions about how it all worked for everybody, but sod it, it worked. It got people talking. And there had been some very important other cases about equal pay in this country. Glasgow City Council, the City Council in Birmingham. These were the big supermarkets have had equal pay cases, haven't they? All really important. But the plain fact is they couldn't quite generate the headlines that a group of entitled female broadcasters could. And Selena's point about talking about money, it's so difficult in this country to talk about money. and we need to start doing it, and women need to be truthful to each other. If someone, a female colleague in your workplace, asks you what you earn, you should tell them, shouldn't you?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and just be, you won't get into trouble for telling them, will you?
No.
No. So if you're being asked, if you're asking somebody because you believe that you're being paid unequally, you won't get into trouble. If you're giving away salary information to competitors, you will get into trouble. But if the intent is really that you feel that you're being underpaid, yes, you can get extra information. Yeah.
Right. I mean, I just think the point is that women have got to speak out, they've got to speak up, and you've got to support each other. And it might not be easy, it might be exceptionally awkward, but, you know, I just feel a little bit better that we actually did something. And there are now women at BBC earning, I think Zoe Ball, who's given up the Radio 2 breakfast show, is on nearly £1 million a year. Now, at that point, people go, well, never listen to her. She's absolutely rubbish. No one's worth £1 million a year. But the guy, Chris Evans, when he was doing it, was earning well over £1 million a year, and he hasn't done it for 10 years. You know, it's got to be, all salaries in broadcasting, arguably, are ridiculously high. Well, that's fine, but make sure you're paying the women the same ridiculously high salaries as you're paying the men. That would be my point.
Were you stressed, Jane, when you were, because you were kind of on your own, you know, it was a small group of people. Were you enjoying it, or were you stressed when you were going through that?
I wasn't on my own. I should say that I had lots of support from other women, not all of whom were able to go public for a string of reasons. You know, some people have got family issues. Everybody's got stuff going on. I get it. It was much easier for the woman on Woman's Hour to be the public, the gob, if you like, who was prepared to say it, because I knew that they wouldn't sack me.
Yeah.
But I was, there were times when a woman who I was working with in another context, who had been the Home Secretary, did say to me, you know, don't worry, if things get difficult, give me a ring. And I actually thought to myself, oh God, what does she mean?
I assumed she was offering you a job.
Was she offering me some sort of additional protection or something?
Oh.
I mean, the BBC is a strange place. It wasn't that bad. I didn't actually think they were going to chuck me off the roof of Broadcasting House or anything. But I do think that it was at its worst, it was just awkward.
Yeah.
And I just said things they'd rather I hadn't said. And it would have been much better if I'll just, in the spirit of transparency and being honest, I then got an email to say that my salary was being increased by £40,000 a year. I mean, okay, right.
And back pay, did you write? Yes.
And they described it, they called it a pay revision.
Oh, wow.
So all of a sudden I was worth 120 grand a year.
Yeah.
Well, if there hadn't been an issue in the first place, why was I suddenly, you know, they knew they were in the wrong.
Yeah.
And they're still fighting. They haven't won, I don't think they've won a single tribunal yet, the BBC. And I should say I was one of, I think, at least well over 100, that's probably still happening, women who did get a pay rise. So it's, you know, sometimes it pays off.
Yeah.
And I just think, even as I talk about it now, I feel faintly dirty. I think it's really embarrassing to talk about money. And that's why we don't do it. But that's why we don't earn as much as men.
Yeah, I mean, it's so, it's so helpful, you know, and I think, you know, we're talking about specifically the BBC, but there are workplaces, you know, I'm sure we've all got colleagues who we speak to, or people that you will speak to, and they will say, you know, maybe they've gone off to get another job, and that's a perfect opportunity sometimes to kind of, you know, go back to your employer and say, look, I've been offered this, and suddenly, you know, if they don't want to lose you, suddenly there's a huge jump in pay. So I think as embarrassing as it might feel, or awkward as it might feel, it's so important that we have these conversations and, you know, get comfortable having these conversations as women.
Olga, is there anything that you want to add?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, you know, just throwing what you were saying, kind of coming from the position of relative power into this conversation definitely helped. As you said, you know, you had that feeling of like, you're not going to get fired probably for saying these things in the air. And I think it's important to kind of recognize the, you know, that the story might be different for other people. We were discussing previously, obviously, I'm not English. So, you know, when I first was, you know, looking for jobs, I was like, I have no one to ask, is this a fair salary? And also because people don't feel particularly comfortable talking about money, generally, like that is definitely then became a challenge because I have no sense of comparison. Like, is it good? Is it bad? Is it weird if I ask? But I think one of the things I wanted to add also, let's not forget that unfortunately we spend a third of our lives at work. So it matters what the workplace is and what the workplace is doing to us. And also women are half of the population. It is not, a small minority. And to think about kind of women empowerment and its spillover effect on other protected characteristics as well, because women are such a diverse group, to think about how this is going to affect race and ethnicity equality, how it's going to affect disability equality and LGBTQI plus equality. And, like you were mentioning, Selena, at the beginning, also women are actually holding majority of spending power in the world. So it's actually in the best economic interest of all countries to actually invest in narrowing down gender pay gap, because it is women that make majority of spending decisions. And drawing from kind of my own professional background, let's not also forget kind of the importance of economic empowerment on other gender equality issues. For instance, domestic abuse survivors often quote lack of kind of financial independence as a reason why they're unable to leave the abusive situation, because they do not have that capital built, perhaps because they took a career break. So, how we can address that, but also because, what they were earning was just much less than what a husband was earning. So it is very much a complex issue. It's just, it does not exist in a vacuum.
Thank you. So Alesha, I'll come to you for that question, but I'm also going to add an additional question to you. As revealed by the Fawcett Society, tomorrow marks equal pay day. So this is the day when women stop getting paid relative to men. What are the barriers that organisations face in reducing the gender pay gap, if any?
Yeah, okay. So first of all, starting on why it's important for women to thrive at work. I think if we think about, I agree with everything that everybody has said here, but two things that jump out at me. One is it cannot be an individualized problem. Like it is, Jane, you're obviously in a very privileged position to speak up, and it was absolutely brilliant that you did, along with so many other women from the BBC. But these issues are happening everywhere, and we can't all take a hit on our individual careers. And we know that women are still punished and ostracized for speaking out and lose their jobs or don't get promoted or get sidelined in other ways. So we have to think about these issues as societal issues and how we can all help each other and how the government can help us and how businesses can work together to make this work. And the second thing is, I think, we're in a situation where wage growth has not increased over time, where we desperately need our economy to grow overall so that we can afford the services that we need as society, and in particular that women consume, like healthcare, like education, like street lamps, like public transport. All of these are gendered issues. And so how do we get our economy to grow if we're not making the best use of our talents across the country? I think we will all be able to think of examples of women in our lives who are underemployed, who might have a job or have had a job, but those jobs were far below their skills level, or they had to cut back on their hours or cut back on their ambitions when they had children because the jobs just weren't available that would allow them to take care of their children while also being in the workplace. And as I say, that's not going to lead to the best economy that we could possibly get, as well as being incredibly frustrating and unfortunate for those women. So we need to get on that, and we as a society need to prioritise this for everybody's benefit, not just for the women that it directly impacts. So coming on to Equal Pay Day, which is tomorrow, what we do with Equal Pay Day is we look at the gender pay gap, and it's important to make the distinction between the gender pay gap and equal pay. So the gender pay gap looks at, on average, what do women earn compared to men? Now, some of that might be down to equal pay, so women doing jobs of the same value as men and being paid less, and I'll come back onto that. But some of it is to do with many other reasons, including what women earn per hour, the number of hours worked, the types of jobs that they do, flexibility, lots of different reasons. companies have to report their gender pay gap, and also the ONS releases statistics every year that look across the whole of society at the gender pay gap. And so what we found based on the ONS research this year was that the gender pay gap, the mean gender pay gap for full-time workers in the UK is 11.3%, which is higher than that reported last year, which was 10.7%. So maybe it's growing, maybe our data is getting better, and actually we were underestimating the gender pay gap in previous years. But fundamentally, that is a ridiculously large number. And if you look at even if you kind of smooth out that trajectory over time, we are not going to see that gender pay gap close anytime soon, unless there is sort of real concerted effort. That number, you know, relates to, in practical terms, women taking home £631 less than men every month. So £7,572 per year. So that's a huge amount. And when we did some research a couple of years ago, the number one thing that women said that they would do with the extra money was turn the lights and energy on more. So women are really, this is not luxury money. This is things that really affect women in their day-to-day and their ability to provide for themselves, for their families, and for their own well-being. Some research that we're releasing tomorrow looks at the composition of that gender pay gap and what the drivers are. And essentially what we've done, and you'll be able to find this on the Fawcett website tomorrow, we've used some economic analysis that I don't fully understand and was done by a brilliant professor at the University of Essex for us, that looks at the composition of the gender pay gap and says, essentially, if women had the same characteristics as men, what, except for the sort of specific thing that we're looking at, what would be the gap? And one of the things that we found was that occupational segregation, so professions that are dominated by women, like caring, education, retail, accounts for 1/6 of that gap, versus finance, technology, a lot of the sectors that the government are about to invest in, we hope. But that's a real imbalance. What we also found was that 2/3 of the gap is unexplained. So if you sort of assume that women and men had the same education levels, they were doing the same jobs for the same number of hours, with the same sort of career structure, there would still be a 2/3 gap in what those people would own. Now, I can't say that that's all due to pay discrimination, but it is very difficult to think about what else is driving that gap. And at the moment, businesses don't need to justify what that gap is, and government doesn't need to justify what's creating that gap. So we're calling on government for a joined up strategy to close that gap, because we don't think it's going to happen on its own. We don't think that businesses are going to do it themselves. And we don't think that individual women constantly trying to have the conversations, constantly trying to ask, why is it that they're suffering more than men, is going to create the change that we need to see.
So the barriers that organizations face are clear from what you've said. How do we fix the problem? So Selena, can I start with you? Thinking about from the individual's perspective themselves, in the absence of organizations doing nothing, how can they be empowered to make sure that they get the salary that they deserve?
So I think it has to be a joined up approach, definitely. So government, I think businesses, obviously businesses have for the last few years, or I don't know how long it's been, about 5 years or so, they have to report their gender pay gap. And if they have 250 employees, if they're under, then they can do it voluntarily. And reporting is one thing, actually interrogating the data, understanding why, understanding why and doing something about it is a completely different thing. So definitely, I'm not saying it's all on us as women to charge in and take control of this issue. But at the same time, I do think, like I said, I spent the first half of my career not being aware of that a gender pay gap existed, not having the tools to negotiate salary, not even thinking about it, not thinking about how important it is to put money in my pensions, not thinking about the fact that we were speaking earlier that women tend to live longer than men. So even when we are accessing our pension, we need to do it for longer. So there's so many reasons why we need to kind of be thinking about this issue ourselves, and thinking about the places that we work, having these salary negotiations, where we can, where you feel safe to do so. Yeah, just really thinking about the way that you use your money in a way that's going to empower you. And it's not always easy. We might not always be in the best position to do that, but I think when we are in the position to do that, in a position of, you know, maybe some privilege, then let's try and do that, I would say.
Amazing. Jane, do you want to say anything specific about unions?
Well, only that I was in the union for many years, the NUJ, and you know, I was a typical pinko liberal type who worked for the BBC, and so I was in the NUJ. But actually, when the shit hit the fan, it turned out the NUJ hadn't actually really taken ownership of the fact that its female members were not getting paid the same rate as their male members. They didn't charge us less for being members of the NUJ, I should say. They seemed okay about us paying the same. Just to go back to Selena's point, I do actually personally feel a bit let down by the union. I have to say, I think they could have done more. But our actual representative was a wonderful woman called Martine Croxall, who was amazing, still works for the BBC, but she's had her issues herself, which if she were here, she could tell you about. But she's a phenomenal woman, and she personally worked really hard. I do think financial education should be absolutely on the school curriculum. I think every pupil, male, female, whatever, should absolutely understand that if they are likely to live to be over 100, as many babies born this year will, they are going to have to make financial preparations for that. I think I've told my daughters the other day that I think it was 1972 when women were first allowed to get a mortgage in this country. I mean, it's just not that long ago. And, you know, we're also basing a lot of our conversations around sort of heteronormative situations. But if you've got two women living together or making a life together, for example, they're at a financial disadvantage. If you're divorced, you're at a financial disadvantage, and you're female, you're less likely to marry again than a man. It may be that you don't want to marry again. I should make that very clear. But there's all sorts of things that are against us. And I just think we just need to nail it. And girls, especially girls, should be confronting these rather brutal economic realities as soon as they get to secondary school, quite frankly. I mean, they should all be saving into a pension. Yeah. It's horrific, but absolutely true. Because the idea that a state pension is going to be around when today's toddlers reach their 70s or 80s, I mean, it's not going to happen, is it? Sorry, I've completely strayed off the topic there, but it's still just very dystopian and terrifying, basically. Quite glad I'm 180.
And if you're affected by financial planning, or you're interested in financial planning, the Financial Times have amazing adults courses and children's courses that are free online for people to download. They're piloting them in schools at the moment. I have no affiliation with the Financial Times, by the way, but it covers some of the issues that we've been talking about on pensions and things. Olga, policies and organizations that actually work to close the gender pay gap.
Sure, definitely. I think, you know, to come back to your point at the beginning, is like no one suddenly wakes up and decides to pay women less. As I mentioned at the beginning, it is an extension of you know, how the society is constructed, the stereotypes that women don't need to earn that much money because, you know, it's more like a pocket money because it's obviously a straight couple, and obviously there is a male breadwinner in the family, right? And women are a bit more docile, so they don't want to handle, you know, the lucrative, massive, demanding projects, etc. So I really loved your point about making sure that we do not put a blame on that system on individual women. It is down to the organization to tackle that, and that is one of the biggest kind of challenges. And I have to admit, every time I hear the word role model, I feel a bit like angry, because it is almost as we are telling women that there is no other way than to thrive against sexism, because it's just going to always be there. So maybe you can give us advice on how you did that. And don't get me wrong, I know role models are incredibly important, but again, it is down to the organizations that to address that issue. And I always say that bias hates structure. So making sure that the organizations have policies in place, but policies that are actually translated to practice. That if you take a look at that policy, you know, if you raise a complaint, what's going to happen. And it's not just a lot of blah, 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 and you just have no idea who to go to, who to talk to. And definitely to everyone in this room, these are the questions you can ask when you're applying for jobs. And obviously speaking from an organization that works with recruiters, actually talking to professional recruiters can help you determine where you are in terms of asking for salary, in terms of asking for a salary. And another thing I would say is for organizations, and again, as an individual, you can inspire your employer, your university to do that, is to do pay audits. You don't have to be a massive organization to review your pay audits. And I would encourage you to actually take a look at that in conjunction with equality, diversity, and inclusion data, because that way you're looking at the symptoms. So where is our gender pay gap, but also at the root causes, because if you find that, your teams are not very diverse, people don't feel safe to speak out, there is no psychological safety, those two things come in place. But just a final point on the policies, I think it's important to recognize that policies, even if you think about menopause policy, they benefit everyone. It's important for everyone. And if you think about child caring policies as well. And one of the most, for me, kind of like effective measures also is for organizations to start addressing gender pay gap from the recruitment level. If you're in organizations that hires people, I have some news for you. Salary is literally the second thing people take a look at after the job title. So they're not even that interested, where it is or what would I be doing. Is like, okay, the job title sounds vaguely like what I would like to be doing. How much money am I getting? And that listing of that salary can actually then help make, people make informed decisions whether this is a place where I can work. And the final thing, drawing on the Fawcett's research and work on ending salary history, do not, not disclosing your current salary. And if you're an employer, don't ask for a current salary, because that's the way you keep underpaid groups underpaid. And again, if you are maybe from a less affluent area or you were underpaid before, all it does, it just keeps you underpaid. Because if I had budget of 80,000 for that role, you come into me and say you're currently on 30, I'm like, great, I'll give you 5,000 more or 10,000 more, and you're gonna be so pleased. So there's a lot that we can do, starting from the recruitment, not asking about the salary history, listing the salary, going into what is currently going in the organization, the pay audits, and then into thinking, okay, so how do we address the policies that they can then trickle down into all the other areas of our lives?
Can I just ask, should you accept that if you're a woman and you choose to have children, you are going to pay a price in terms of your salary?
Obviously no. And I think it's also an interesting like way we talk about when we talk about the childcare costs. It's always associated with women's salary, because we just kind of assume that it's the woman that pays that. That if the family cannot afford, childcare, it's going to be the woman that is going to stay. So absolutely, this is not what should be happening. But every time we say, like, oh, women have to pay so much money into childcare, working on stereotypes, my first question is like, why do women have to pay? Men may earn more money. Like, why is that not immediately associated with male salaries? But obviously, this is not how the world is currently constructed, and it is a big issue that we know to a certain extent that motherhood does have a negative impact on salaries, but actually it has
fatherhood doesn't have.
It actually has a positive impact. Exactly. So if you're a father, then you actually are earning more. So, which again raises the question, why then are not fathers the main kind of targets of thinking about who's going to be paying for childcare? Because this is just an extension of a stereotypical role of women as carers, and if you don't perform the role yourself, it is then your responsibility to kind of organize that care through some institutions. But it's seen as, I need to do it from my money, because this is again an extension of my stereotypical role. And that just showcases how pay inequality does not exist in the vacuum, because, you know, if there isn't enough facilities for childcare, they become more expensive. Then who can afford them? You know, it is going to be women from the most disadvantaged backgrounds that then are pushed even further away because they're like, well, I cannot afford that, right?
And let's just be honest about it. It's women from more disadvantaged backgrounds who are going to be caring for the children. Because they're working in nurseries and they're not being paid a proper salary.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's actually, that element of it is really uncomfortable.
It's horrible. And there's a lot of research that says that women, I think it's a third of women in the childcare profession are thinking about leaving in the next 2 years because they're so underpaid. And a lot of them love their jobs. But actually, if you look at the pay comparison with retail or hospitality, you know, it's a challenging, skilled profession which is valued less than other roles which have less responsibility and less skill involved.
Can I just add here again, my love stereotypes. There is actually like a link to that, because it is seen again as a natural extension of women's role. So why should I be paying you for this role?
Yeah, it's not your skill. It just comes naturally to you.
It comes naturally to you, but there is something there ingrained, because if you think about it, this is the people that care literally for the future of society. How come these people are paid less than people who made apps, right? But it is because, you know, stereotypically what's female, what's feminine is valued less, and because it is seen as an extension of women's role, you know, why do we have to pay you more money? Don't you just love babies?
I think the coming back to the motherhood penalty, it's really interesting because it consists of so many different things that mean that women end up underpaid, or mothers end up underpaid in particular. So some of that is about you know, the leave that they take, maternity leave. A lot of people will say, well, if you take a year out of the office, or 2 or 3 or whatever, then of course you're missing out on those skills. We did some work last year that found that the longer that a woman takes out of her job, the less support she gets when she comes back in, which kind of goes to this thing about, oh, well, she's a mother now. She's only taken 2 weeks. Well, we'll give her some understanding and support when she comes back. But if she's taken 6 months plus, actually she's on her own. And like, let's hope that she can make it work. But if she can't, that's fine. And that doesn't matter whether companies, which constantly astonishes me, they pay thousands in training women up, in putting them through courses and getting them promoted, doing all sorts of things. And then the woman has a baby and they're like, okay, we're happy to write off that investment, basically. Like, I don't see that it makes financial sense for them at all. But so some of it comes down to that. Some of it comes down to flexible working and the sense that, you know, women will do fewer hours. Yes. Those opportunities aren't always available to men. We know that flexible working is still offered on a basis of, does the person deserve it? Woman who's had a baby, yes, she's allowed to do flexible working. Man who's had a baby, what, are you not committed to your job anymore? Like, well, that's ridiculous. So yes, she could do flexible working. Obviously that will impact her take-home pay, but also only up to a certain level in the company. So what you often see is the flexible working jobs are done at sort of entry level or all the way up to kind of middle management. And then past that point, employers just don't have the imagination to think about how they could organize that work in a different way that would allow them to make those jobs flexible, which might mean a job share. It might be like lower hours. It might be working from home certain days a week or whatever. There are so many different options now that are available, and we have so much technology that can enable rostering in different ways or fixed hours when women want it so that they can actually plan their childcare. But employers aren't all taking those steps to make that happen. And related to the flexible working, because we know it's so important, one of the things that Fawcett's really campaigning on is an advertising duty to make sure that firms advertise jobs as flexible where they can be done. Because what you often find is that women within jobs are able to negotiate a certain level of flexibility from their employer, again, because they're seen as deserving in some way. The women who get that flexibility are often the ones who are more privileged. They're more likely to be white. They're more likely to have done very well in other bits of their jobs. They're also less likely to be disabled. And then somebody new coming in doesn't necessarily get those privileges, or that job isn't open to them in quite the same way. And what that does is it makes flexible working be seen as this sort of privileged benefit for some types of people. And it means that a lot of people, and it also justifies those jobs being paid less per hour. So it's not just about the fact that you're taking home less overall. It's also about the fact that those jobs are valued less. And again, they're sort of stuck beneath a certain level. So we do need to see flexible working normalised more across companies. That also would help to retain more women at the middle management level, which then creates a pipeline up to senior management, which is where we know that women are sort of massively underrepresented.
Can I just come on the career returners piece? It's really important to me that, everyone in this room also understands that there's plenty of great recruitment agencies actually specializing in career returners. So if you find yourself or someone in your environment in that situation where it becomes harder and harder to come back to work, either after, childcare responsibilities or any other care leave, or maybe because of your health, there's plenty of recruitment agencies that specialize in that, can help you revamp your CV, can help kind of advocate for your skills with businesses. And a lot of businesses are actually offering something called like returnerships, where you are taken in to kind of be kept up to speed with some of the newer technology or newer solutions, while also taking advantage of what you already know. So there is plenty of opportunities there as well. You can check out the REC website, and our members are listed there. So all I'm just saying that there are organizations that are already working on that. So please do make sure that you spread that message if there is anyone in your environment that you feel might benefit from this.
Okay, so you've heard now from Selena, Jane, Olga and Alesha, so gotten to know them a little bit. I'd love to get you involved in the question, so please do put up your hand if you have a question. 2 things on housekeeping. We recorded the panel, but we're not going to record the Q&A.